and it's from Psalm 37. Depart from evil and do good, so you shall abide forever. For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his faithful ones. The righteous shall be kept safe forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous shall inherit the land and live in it forever. The salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is your refuge in the time of trouble. The Lord helps them and rescues them. The Lord rescues them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in him. Our next reading is from Micah 6, and we are saying this in unison this morning. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God.
Good morning. It gives me an extra moment to get up here. I want to thank Pastor Matt for the invitation to speak to you today. It takes a level of courageousness and confidence to have an outsider come and share one's pulpit, and I just want to acknowledge that. I love giving guest sermons. Even if I'm no good, you'll be nice and tell me it was great. Then by the time you realize you didn't like it, I'll be gone and I won't be here next week. I'll do my best. As you heard, I'm with GIMA, the Greater Indianapolis Multifaith Alliance. I'm often asked, what's the difference between interfaith and multifaith? The answer is nothing. However, I don't like the connotation of the word interfaith. It's become synonymous with a movement for the last 30-some years that says, we're all the same, why can't we get along? I have to confess, I usually call these kumbaya moments. I didn't know we were going to sing that song. We're not the same. And while we've done a pretty good job about knowing about each other, we've not done a very good job knowing each other. So, more problematic for me is that many faith communities, most notably the Black church and evangelicals, have gotten the message that you can't be in a relationship with me unless you give up part of who you are. That's not okay with me, and I think it's counter to our faith narratives. My tradition says all people are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. That's all are created in the image of God, not just those who look, act, believe, think like me, everyone. My tagline is, we love each other because of our differences, not in spite of them. Dr. King said, when I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. So the core of our work is knowing each other, relationships. We call them sacred friendships. Most people don't know that GIMA was born out of an NYU Wagner School project on civil dialogue. We must learn or relearn to know each other. And while we can disagree, we can do it with civility, integrity, and love. And we leverage those relationships to advocate, to seek justice, specifically to address the evictions and homelessness crises in Indianapolis. Someone recently asked me, how'd you get into housing advocacy? My answer usually is, it wasn't my choice, it was chosen for me. In 2019, a group of some 90 leaders across the city gathered at the Interchurch Center to pick a social justice issue for this nascent new organization. It didn't even have a name yet. Everything was on the table: food insecurity, violence. The winner with no close second was evictions. I don't think it's a coincidence that Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, had come out shortly before that. If you are familiar with that book, it doesn't make Indianapolis look very good, for good reason. In 2016, when they started ranking cities, Indianapolis was number 2 in the country in total evictions. In total evictions, not per capita, in total evictions. Second only to New York City. City rankings haven't really been updated yet, but we're likely now number 4 or 5. Yay, we've dropped. But it's not because our evictions have lessened, they've actually increased. It's because the rest of the country is catching up. It's still a major problem. So I began drinking from the fire hose that is housing and its issues, and I've learned that housing is the number 1 social determinant of health. Housing affects physical, mental health, crime, and social well-being. Your recent series, Won't You Be My Neighbor, brilliantly highlighted this, and I thank you for that. I believe housing is a human right. It's not in America, though, and worse in Indiana than almost every other state. Enough about me. I'm supposed to talk about Micah and justice. Just a moment ago, we read Micah 6:8 from the NIV translation. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. I want to offer another translation, slightly different. Not better, not worse, just a little different. Here's my offering. He has told you, O people, what is good and what the Lord demands of you, but to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk discreetly with your God. Let's unpack that a little bit. Instead of God requires, this translation says God demands. Subtle? Not so subtle. As a Jew, doing justice is demanded of me. For instance, there's no such thing really as charity in Judaism. The word often mischaracterized for charity is tzedakah. It's not charity. The root of the word tzedakah is tzedek, which is the Hebrew word for justice. Giving of myself is not a choice. It's not a choice to do charity. It's a requirement as a human being. My faith not only demands that I do justice, but that I be justice. I know that's not very good English. What's the difference between doing and being? Justice. In Deuteronomy, we're told, Tzedek, Tzedek tirdof. If you ever go to Beth El Tzedek over on Spring Mill, it's written on the outside of the building. Why justice twice? The translation is justice, justice you shall pursue. The 18th century Polish Rabbi Simcha Bunim explains, justice alone is not enough, because there are many types of justice, just as there are many types of truth. Every regime has its own justice. The Torah therefore stresses, justice, justice you shall pursue, namely, the ethic of justice, where both the means and the ends are just. The means are just. The ends are just. Therefore, two justices. So, justice as the intention, being justice. Justice as the result, doing justice. A little Jewish context. Judaism has no system of reward and punishment. Put simply, no heaven as a destination after death and no hell as punishment. Why we hope there's something after this, and we refer to it as ha'olam haba, literally the world after this one. We act as if this is it. As the psalmist said, Zeh hayom asa Adonai, nagila v'simcha vo. This is the day that God has made. Let us celebrate and rejoice in it. So why do good at all? We would say, Matoch shelo lishma ba lishma. Literally, what's not for its own sake will come from its own sake. Good intentions will follow good actions. We do the right thing because it's the right thing for its own sake. The next demand in the Micah text, instead of love mercy, the translation says, love loving kindness. Thank you, Chris, for introducing this. The Hebrew actually says, V'ahavat chesed. Ahava, love. Chesed, kindness, or the love between people, the love of each other. So the demand is to love the kindness between people. Lastly, humbly versus walk discreetly. The text uses the word tsnaya, which can mean humble, but it's more aptly a modest or austere. Not a passive way of acting, but of being humble, but as a way of actively engaged in doing good, doing rightly, in active service for humanity. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz comments, God does not want choice burnt offerings or rivers of oil, nor does God request human sacrifice. God told you, man, what is good and what the Lord demands from you. God is not asking for extraordinary deeds, but only to execute justice, to observe the statutes and laws, and to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God by acting in a modest manner and leading a humble life. While you must recognize, thank, and praise God for all the miracles God has performed for you, God does not request extraordinary offerings from you, but unassuming deeds, doing justice. Micah says to us, God is giving us the template to do justice. It is acting with love in order to love and actively engaging in seeking righteousness and justice for others. Personal insight about me, I am an avowed Buberist. Say that 10 times real fast. Martin Buber was born in the late 19th century, often considered a philosopher, theologian, and an existentialist. I guess he was all of those. But for me, what he really was a chassid, a pious man. Buber said, and I'm paraphrasing, humans have two kinds of relationships, I, thou, I, it. The I-it relationship is transactional. An example, I go to the grocery store, I put my stuff on the line, cashier rings it up, I pay my money, I go on my way. The I-thou relationship is relational. Using the same example, I stop, I look the clerk in the eye, and I say, hi, and I say thank you. And Buber said that in this moment of relational acknowledgement, I experience God. And in this moment of relationship and loving kindness, I am being justice as I experience the divine. Again, it's in our relationship that we experience the love that Dr. King spoke of, the supreme unifying principle of life. My problem is I gravitate to the self-checkout lanes. Maybe because in those moments, keeping it transactional with the machine is easier than meeting God and others. I also want to acknowledge it's brave to talk about politics from the pulpit or even in church. In one of Pastor's previous sermons, yes, I watched them, he said we've lost our prophetic imagination. That's brilliant. Prophetic imagination. I'm old enough to have seen religious leaders moving from engaging in the world to not. I often hear, my job is to pastor my congregation. I certainly don't disagree with that, but I don't understand, how can you pastor your congregation separate from what's going on out there? What's going on in the world? I explained that GMA does advocacy, and one way we do that is lobbying the General Assembly. Yes, I'm a lobbyist. Indiana is one of only 6 states in the country that don't allow tenants to leverage their rent to make their landlord abide by the lease. And 2 of those states allow tenants to do that through the courts. So there's really only 4 states: Idaho, North Dakota, Utah, and Indiana. I seek systemic change. I want our system to value the least among us. Currently, it does not. As my friend, the Reverend Dr. Ivan Hicks says constantly, and I mean constantly, we are to vanguard the cause of widows and orphans. Our housing system is unjust. People are bullied and abused, first by their landlords, then by the courts, and by our state. Changing systems is hard, slow, painstaking, sometimes painful work that does not give quick wins. And if I'm going to ask each of us to act civilly and justly with each other, I have to do the same with our legislators. I must work towards an I-thou relationship with them. I confess, it's hard sometimes. So far, not impossible. I'm proud to say that I'm actually building friendships with legislators who couldn't be more different than me. I hope the feeling is mutual. And these same new friends want to talk to me about their faith, how it influences their decision making. Sometimes I push back. Most of the time I just listen. They want to be heard and not yelled at, criticized, or blamed. Go figure. Now, to be sure, sometimes we need to criticize, but with civility, respect, without rancor, divisiveness, or judgment. If all this sounds daunting, it is. None of the prophets said, this will be easy. In fact, many said, this will be really hard. A dear friend of mine, who actually knows more about housing and homelessness than anybody, at least in Indiana, his new euphemism or new tagline is, there are no silver bullets. It's all silver buckshot. There's no one thing that will fix fill in the blank. We have to do it all. But kindness is hard. My mother used to say, it's just as easy to be nice as it is to be mean. I always wanted to say to her, well, stop being mean to me. But for once, as a kid, I kept my mouth shut. But she was right. Being kind takes very little effort, just a decision. So while we labor for justice, we can be kind to each other and to ourselves. I have a sticky note on my monitor at home with this text from the Talmud. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not your duty to repair the world, but neither are you free to sit and do nothing. We don't have to fix everything, but we have to try. So I hope you'll join us in this quest for justice, which will measure not solely by metrics and data, but by our ability to love each other and to be kind. Thank you.